Royal Enfield just did something Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki cannot ignore. It did not chase the biggest engine, the sharpest sport bike, or the most complicated electronics package. It went after the rider who still wants a motorcycle that feels honest. A bike with a fair price, a familiar shape, a manageable engine, and enough character to make a man look back at it in the garage. That used to be Japan's safest ground. For decades, the Japanese brands gave riders machines that made sense, ran for years, and did not ask for excuses. But now, Royal Enfield is standing in that same lane, and it is starting to look less like a curiosity and more like a problem. Watch until the end, because the answer may say more about the future of motorcycles than one spec sheet ever could. Japan's new problem. A lot of riders in the United States did not take Royal Enfield seriously. Some remembered the old reputation. Some thought the bikes were too slow, and some simply walked past the badge because the Japanese brands already had their trust. That was understandable because trust is not built with slogans. It is built with miles, cold starts, parts counters, and years of not being stranded. But something has changed on the showroom floor. The bikes do not look like toys anymore, and they do not feel like temporary beginner machines either. A rider who comes in expecting a joke can end up standing beside one longer than planned, looking at the tank, the frame, the engine, and the price tag, trying to figure out why the whole thing feels more serious than he expected. That is where the problem begins for the big Japanese names. This is not about Royal Enfield suddenly replacing a Goldwing, a V-Strom, or an old Shadow that has already earned its scars. Those machines have their place. The real issue is that Royal Enfield is entering the part of the market where a rider says, "I do not need the most complicated thing here. I need the bike that makes sense." That sentence used to belong mostly to Japan. The Japanese brands were not always the flashiest, but they were often the sensible answer when a rider wanted to spend his money once and ride for years. Now, Royal Enfield is trying to become that sensible answer for a new moment. Not by copying every Japanese trick, and not by pretending to be more advanced than it is. The strange part is that this challenge does not come from the top of the market. It is not a horsepower war, and it is not a luxury touring war. It is coming from the middle, where motorcycles still have to answer to real money, real backs, real knees, and real garages. And the first sign that it is not just talk comes from the size of the company behind the move. Now I know this one will split riders, so let me know your side. Are the Japanese brands still the safest bet? Or has Royal Enfield finally built something worth taking seriously? Drop your opinion below, and if you like honest rider talk, without the dealer spin, tap the like button. The million bike warning. A rider has every right to be skeptical when a smaller name starts making noise. Plenty of motorcycle brands have arrived with a shiny booth, a loud promise, and a lineup that looked good until the first parts delay. Older riders have seen that movie before. That is why Royal Enfield crossing the 1 million annual sales mark matters. It does not mean the brand has beaten Honda, and it does not mean every bike will be perfect. It means this is no longer a little side act hoping to survive on curiosity. A company moving that kind of volume has weight behind it, and weight changes how dealers, suppliers, and riders look at the brand. For the rider at home, that number is not corporate bragging. It is a question of confidence. If you buy a bike, you want to know somebody will still support it after the first set of tires. You want parts, warranty work, accessories, and a dealer network that does not treat your machine like an orphan. But dismissing the company as irrelevant is getting harder. The 350 models brought approachable prices and familiar shapes. The 650 twins gave the brand a smoother, more highway-friendly heart. The 450 platform pushed it into a more modern lane without throwing away the simple character that got people interested. That mix is not random. It is a ladder. The warning for the Japanese brands is not that Royal Enfield has more resources than they do. It does not. The warning is that Royal Enfield is big enough to stay in the conversation, and focused enough to make that conversation uncomfortable. It does not need to win every comparison. It only needs enough riders to stop laughing and start asking questions. Once that happens, the next question gets more serious. Why did Royal Enfield choose the middle of the market instead of chasing the high-dollar machines first? The answer is sitting where many riders feel the market has drifted away from them. The middleweight trap. The middleweight motorcycle used to be one of the cleanest ideas in the business. It was not supposed to be a status symbol, and it did not need to embarrass a race bike. It was supposed to be useful. Enough motor for the highway, enough comfort for a weekend, enough weight to feel planted, and enough simplicity that a rider could understand what he owned. That was the territory Japanese brands understood better than almost anyone. They built bikes that could commute during the week, run state lines on the weekend, and survive years of ordinary maintenance. Many of those machines were not glamorous when they were new, but they became legends later because they did their job without drama. The problem is not that the Japanese brands forgot how to engineer good motorcycles. They still build excellent machines. The problem is that the middle has become more complicated than it used to be. Some bikes are sharper than many returning riders want. Some are styled like they are angry before the engine starts. Some have prices that make a man ask why a practical motorcycle now feels like a luxury decision. That creates room for a different kind of machine. Royal Enfield does not have to be the most powerful bike in the class to be dangerous. It only has to feel natural to the rider who is not chasing bragging rights. A manageable seat, a relaxed engine, a shape that makes sense, and a price that does not make the buyer feel trapped can do more damage than a spec sheet suggests. This is where a lot of internet arguments miss the point. Somebody will always say a Japanese bike is faster, smoother, lighter, or more refined. Sometimes that is true. But not every buyer is trying to win that argument. Some riders are asking a quieter question. Will I actually enjoy owning this? Or will I spend the whole time explaining why I paid so much for features I barely use? That is why the middleweight fight matters. It is not the loudest part of the industry, but it may be the most sensitive. When prices rise, when insurance bites, and when every showroom seems to push a man toward more machine than he asked for, the rider who wants enough starts looking elsewhere. Once he starts looking, the finance desk becomes the next battlefield. Where loyalty meets math. Every experienced rider knows the sticker price is only the greeting. The real conversation starts after freight, setup, documents, accessories, tax, title, registration, insurance, and financing enter the room. That is when a motorcycle that looked reasonable can suddenly feel like it brought a lawyer with it. This is where Royal Enfield becomes dangerous in a very practical way. The bike does not have to be perfect. It has to be good enough at a number that still leaves a rider breathing room. That matters more now than it did when money was cheaper, and every dealer could act like buyers had no choice. A rider may respect a Honda Rebel 500. He may like the Kawasaki Eliminator. He may understand why a Yamaha middleweight costs what it costs, and he may trust Suzuki durability without question. But when the final number gets written down, respect can turn into hesitation. There is a difference between knowing a bike is good and feeling good about the deal. Royal Enfield lives in that hesitation. If a rider sits on one and thinks, "This is nicer than I expected," the next thing he checks is the number. If that number feels sane, the whole comparison changes. Suddenly, the question is not whether the Japanese bike is technically better in every category. The question becomes whether the difference is worth the extra money. That is a dangerous question for any established brand. It pulls the buyer away from loyalty and into plain arithmetic. Tires cost money. Insurance costs money. Trips cost money. Maintenance costs money. A lot of riders would rather have a bike they can enjoy and still afford the weekend than stretch for a machine that looks better on paper. This is not about being cheap. There is a difference between cheap and sensible. Cheap feels like regret waiting to happen. Sensible feels like a man making a clean decision with his eyes open. Royal Enfield is trying to live in that second category, and when it works, it hits the rider right where he makes real choices. But price only opens the door. Something else keeps the bike in a rider's head after he walks back to his truck. Old school without the costume. A lot of modern motorcycles are impressive and forgettable at the same time. They stop well, handle well, start every morning, and do almost everything the brochure promised. Then the rider parks them, looks back, and feels nothing. That is not a small problem in a business built on emotion. Royal Enfield understands the shape of memory. Round headlamps, metal tanks, visible engines, simple side covers, real proportions, and names people can remember all do work before the first ride begins. The bike looks like a motorcycle in the oldest sense of the word. Not a toy, not a gadget, not a machine trying to scare traffic. That matters to riders who grew up around machines that had an obvious purpose. You could look at an old bike and understand the fuel, air, spark, frame, wheels, and seat. Modern motorcycles do not need to be primitive, but they do need to feel human. When the machine gets too styled, too covered, or too busy, some riders feel like the motorcycle has been hidden from them. Here is the difference that matters. Some retro motorcycles feel like a modern bike wearing old clothes for a weekend. Royal Enfield often feels like the old idea was never fully thrown away. That is not a scientific measurement, but riders know it when they see it. A machine can be objectively decent and still not make a man turn around in the garage. Japanese brands have built beautiful retro machines too. Nobody should pretend otherwise. Kawasaki understands heritage. Honda knows how to make clean, approachable motorcycles. Yamaha has history running through its name. Suzuki has machines that still carry old-school honesty. But across the wider showroom, that emotional consistency is harder to find. Royal Enfield has made that consistency part of the brand. Even when the models change, the message stays close. Simple shapes, approachable power, recognizable names, and a strong sense that the rider does not need to apologize for choosing something slower. That is not weakness when the buyer wants a machine to live with, not just brag about. The look gets attention, but the business strategy decides whether attention turns into momentum. The latter. Japan should watch. Royal Enfield is not just throwing motorcycles at the wall and hoping one sticks. The lineup is starting to look like a staircase, and that is more important than any single model. A rider can enter the brand at one level, move sideways, move up, or add another bike without feeling like he has changed worlds completely. The 350 family gives the brand an accessible base. Those bikes are not built for riders who want to win highway roll-ons. They are built for approachability, style, commuting, and relaxed riding. That matters because every brand needs a doorway, and a doorway that looks good can bring in people who might never have considered the badge. Then, the 650 twins carry the heart of the brand into a more serious conversation. The Interceptor, Continental, Super Meteor, Shotgun, Bear, and Classic 650 show how one engine family can wear different personalities. That is smart manufacturing, but it is also smart storytelling. The rider recognizes the family even when the purpose changes. That is the part worth watching, because platform families can make a small brand feel bigger than it is. The engine becomes familiar. The maintenance conversation gets easier. The buyer starts seeing a lineup instead of one lonely model. This is where Japanese brands should pay attention. They know platform strategy better than almost anyone, but Royal Enfield is using it in a very focused way. The bikes do not feel like disconnected products from separate committees. They feel like different answers to the same basic rider question. How much motorcycle do you need? And what kind of feeling do you want with it? The risk, of course, is that Royal Enfield must keep quality, service, and parts support moving with the lineup. A ladder is only useful if the steps hold weight. Riders will forgive character. They will not forgive being stranded by weak support. But the plan is visible now. Royal Enfield is not just selling one charming machine. It is building a route through motorcycling, from simple singles to modern adventure machines to classic twins. Once that route reaches the dealer floor, loyalty starts getting tested in a way that is hard to measure from a corporate office. And that testing does not happen in press releases. It happens when a rider finally throws a leg over the bike, when a skeptic sits down. Most riders do not change brand loyalty because of one advertisement. They change because of an experience that bothers their assumptions. A man walks into a dealership thinking he already knows what the good brands are, then he sits on something different and realizes the old ranking in his head may need adjustment. That is the quiet danger of Royal Enfield. The bikes often look better in person than skeptics expect. The seat height feels approachable. The tank shape feels natural. The controls do not feel like they were designed by someone who never met a rider over 50. None of that wins an argument online, but it can change a buying decision in a showroom. A loyal Japanese rider may still believe the Honda will last forever. He may still trust Yamaha engineering, Kawasaki toughness, or Suzuki common sense. Those beliefs are not wrong. But trust does not always equal excitement. A rider can trust one bike and still find himself curious about another. Curiosity is where conquest sales begin. It does not feel dramatic at first. It is just a man saying, "Let me sit on that one." Then he asks about the warranty. Then he asks about the final number. Then he asks whether the dealer has parts. Then he goes home and watches owner reviews, not because he has decided, but because the idea has gotten under his skin. The showroom reaction matters because motorcycles are physical. Pictures do not tell the whole story. A spec sheet cannot show whether a tank feels right between your knees, whether the bar reach feels natural, or whether the bike makes you want to ride slowly just to enjoy it. Those small reactions can carry more weight than a horsepower chart. Royal Enfield benefits from being underestimated. When expectations are low, a decent experience feels like a surprise. If the paint looks good, the engine sounds right, and the bike feels planted enough, the rider recalculates. He may still choose Japan, and many will. But the old automatic decision has been interrupted. That interruption is what every established brand should fear. Not mass desertion, not instant collapse, just interruption. A rider who used to walk straight to the Japanese row now takes a detour. A rider who came for a used Honda now asks about a new Royal Enfield. A rider who thought he was done buying new motorcycles starts thinking maybe there is still one that makes sense. And Royal Enfield is not only trying to win the rider standing in the showroom today. It is also trying to make the next generation feel like the brand has a past worth carrying forward. The electric wild card. Electric motorcycles have a culture problem. Many riders do not reject them because they hate technology in every form. They reject them because too many electric machines feel like appliances with wheels. Quiet, expensive, hard to repair, and disconnected from the sound and mechanical feeling that made motorcycles matter in the first place. Royal Enfield seems to understand that problem better than some companies with bigger research budgets. Instead of presenting electric as a cold break from the past, it brought back the Flying Flea name. That name carries history, lightness, and a sense of purpose. Whether the final product wins over traditional riders is another question, but the branding move itself is sharp. This is not about pretending every rider will run out and buy an electric motorcycle. Many will not, and that is fine. Some riders want pistons, heat, vibration, gears, an exhaust note until the day they stop riding. That feeling deserves respect. Motorcycling is not just transportation, and no spreadsheet can fully explain why an engine sound matters. But the strategy still matters. Royal Enfield is trying to make electric feel less disposable before the category fully matures. It is giving tomorrow's rider a story instead of just a battery pack. It is saying the future does not have to erase every old idea to move forward. The Japanese brands have been more cautious in this space, and there are good reasons for that. Battery cost, range limits, charging habits, weight, and rider skepticism are real problems. Any company that moves too fast can end up with expensive inventory nobody wants. Caution is not stupidity, but caution has a price. If Royal Enfield becomes the brand that makes electric feel approachable and connected to motorcycle memory, it gains something beyond sales. It gains narrative ground. It can say, we are not abandoning the past. We are carrying a piece of it forward. That is powerful in a market where many riders fear the future means losing everything they loved. And that creates a response problem. Because the more you look at Royal Enfield's position, the harder it is for the Japanese brands to answer without exposing the gap that created the opening. Japan's impossible choice. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki still have enormous strengths. They have engineering depth, dealer history, parts systems, reliability records, racing memories, touring credibility, and decades of rider trust. Anyone pretending those brands are finished is just making noise. The real issue is more subtle. Royal Enfield does not need to beat them where they are strongest. It only needs to keep pressure on the part of the market where their answer has become less clear. That is the affordable, useful, character-filled motorcycle a regular rider can justify without feeling like he compromised his pride. If the Japanese brands cut prices hard, they protect volume but hurt margins. If they build more retro machines, they risk looking like they are chasing Royal Enfield's lane. If they add more electronics and sharper styling, they may satisfy one group of buyers while pushing away the rider who wants less complication. If they ignore the threat, Royal Enfield keeps growing its credibility one owner at a time. That is a trap, not because Japan is weak, but because the lane is delicate. The buyer in this space does not want a cheap machine that feels cheap. He does not want fake nostalgia. He does not want a motorcycle that looks like it was designed only for a city photo shoot. He wants a machine that makes sense after the paperwork, after the first service, and after the first season. The Japanese brands can answer this if they choose to. They have the talent, they have the factories. They have the history. They know how to build engines that run forever and bikes that carry riders across states without drama. The question is whether they still want to fight for the ordinary rider with the same seriousness they bring to higher margin machines. That is where Royal Enfield's move becomes more than a product story. It becomes a mirror. It forces the older brands to look at what they have made the middle of the market become. Are the bikes still approachable? Are they still memorable? Are they still priced in a way that makes a regular rider feel respected? Or have too many models become good machines that somehow do not stir much loyalty? This is the human observation sitting underneath the whole story. Royal Enfield is not attacking Japan with superior engineering. It is attacking Japan with a reminder. Motorcycles do not have to be extreme to matter. They do not have to be expensive to feel proud. They do not have to be overloaded to be desirable. The damage, if it comes, will not arrive as a headline saying one brand defeated another. It will arrive in smaller ways. A rider who would have bought a Japanese middleweight chooses an Interceptor instead. A returning rider picks a classic because it feels less intimidating. A budget-conscious rider takes a Himalayan seriously. A younger rider sees Flying Flea as a cleaner way into motorcycling, with a real story attached. Those are small decisions on their own. Together, they become pressure. And pressure is how markets change before the big companies admit anything has shifted. That is why the real test is not happening in a boardroom. It is happening in garages, dealerships, owner groups, and late-night conversations between riders who know what a motorcycle is supposed to feel like. And that brings the warning back to one simple question. The final garage test. Royal Enfield did not scare the Japanese brands by building a perfect motorcycle. It scared them by making riders ask why a simple, proud, affordable motorcycle feels so rare now. That is the part worth watching, not some overnight takeover. Not a fantasy, where Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki suddenly forget how to build bikes. The warning is slower than that, and probably more dangerous. That is the real warning. Royal Enfield did not need to beat Japan with horsepower. It only needed to remind riders that a motorcycle can still be simple, proud, affordable, and worth keeping. If you think Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki should be worried, comment below and tell us why. Like the video if this made sense, and subscribe for more honest motorcycle breakdowns built for riders who still know what matters.